Lebanon and Israel held unprecedented talks today. Those are being mediated by the U.S., and they're meant to settle a maritime border dispute that's gone on for years. The two countries are still technically at war. Now, today's talks broke up after barely an hour, but the two sides did agree to meet again in 2 weeks' time. Our international affairs editor, Philip Turl's been keeping a close eye on this. He joins me now for more. Philip, tell us a bit more about what exactly the two sides are talking about.
Well, I don't think we should get too excited, Jeannie, about this being a major breakthrough in peace talks between Israel and Lebanon. What we're talking about here is a dispute over maritime waters in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, the bottom line here and the backbone of these discussions is the fact that, as we've been talking about over the past few months here on France 24, there is a huge financial crisis going on in Lebanon, where currently the debt is 170% of GDP. So the country desperately needs natural resources to try to boost its economy. And recent discoveries of gas and oil in the Eastern Mediterranean have put pressure on the Lebanese authorities to come up with some kind of deal with Israel over this maritime dispute, which goes back all the way to 2011. Now, the dispute basically concerns 860 square kilometers of territory in the Eastern Mediterranean that is claimed by both sides. And this is because back in 2011, Israel ratified a maritime border with Cyprus based on an agreement, a non-written agreement it had with Lebanon, between Lebanon and Cyprus, which had previously been signed. But when that agreement was signed between Israel and Cyprus, Lebanon said that 860 kilometers of space was not included in it. And that's been the crux of this dispute since then. So the two sides have finally come to the negotiating table today. They've met for an hour. They don't meet face to face. They meet with mediators from the United Nations and the United States, carrying the messages between them. But it is a first step forward. And as I said, there's increasing pressure on the authorities in Lebanon to come up with some kind of way of bailing out the economy, which is in dire straits right now. And I think that can explain why these discussions have finally got to the negotiating table.
Philip, the United States has been mediating this issue for about a decade now. It was only earlier this month that an agreement was reached on this framework for the talks. Are we really any closer to a normalization of ties between Lebanon and Israel, which, just to remind everyone again, are still technically at war?
No, I don't think we are any closer. I think that these are two separate issues. There's an issue over the maritime border on one side, and then there's an issue over the land border, the so-called blue border between Israel and Lebanon on the other side. And there's been no progress on those discussions. Now, what is going on here also is that you may remember there was an agreement just earlier this month, or last month rather, between the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, renewing relations between those two Gulf states and Israel. And of course, Donald Trump, who's in an election year, would like to have another agreement between Lebanon and Israel before we go into the United States elections next month. So there has been increased pressure on the Lebanese government to get to the negotiating table with Israel to try to work out some kind of agreement. But even the Lebanese delegation doesn't agree on who should be in that negotiating group, saying it doesn't want civilians in it. So we're not really any closer, I don't think, to reaching an agreement on that maritime border for the moment. But there is some progress in the fact that the two sides have started talking officially to each other.
Philip, thanks for that. Philip Turl there speaking to us about those talks now between Lebanon and Israel.